Sit down. Zara, this won't take long. Grant Knox snapped, his voice carrying across the executive boardroom like a whip crack. A file folder slid across the table, the sound sharp against the polished wood. You don't own a thing here, he added with a smirk, as if each word was meant to strip me of more than just my job. The sentence hung in the air. My ears burned as 20 pairs of eyes turned my way. Some were wide with surprise, others carefully blank. But none dared to speak. A woman I had once mentored, someone whose career I had defended countless times, lowered her gaze to her notepad. She couldn't meet my eyes. That silence was louder than any insult. And in moments like these, when the world tries to erase your worth, never forget to take care of your health. Open the window to breathe fresh air. This means a lot to you. Tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in the very place you gave everything to. My name is Zara Dean. For 11 years, I was the director of risk underwriting at Stratagem Dynamics. I built the safety nets no one else noticed. When reckless deals threatened to sink us, I was the one who combed through pages of legal jargon, flagging the traps, ensuring contracts could withstand lawsuits, audits, or political shifts. I wasn't glamorous, but I was the reason Stratagem never collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. I missed holidays, family dinners, even my father's last birthday, all to guard this company from itself. And across from me stood Grant Knox, CEO in his custom navy suit, hair slicked back to perfection. The picture of corporate power to investors. He was visionary to those of us inside. He was a gambler who craved applause more than stability. He hated breaks, and I had always been the one pressing down hardest. Now, with cameras waiting in the lobby and a $1.9 billion deal within his reach, he wanted me gone, stripped, humiliated, forgotten. The boardroom felt colder than steel. I should have argued, shouted, begged even. But instead, I reached for the envelope, my hands steady despite the fire in my chest. A thin smile touched my lips. Though no one could read it, I tucked the envelope under my arm, stood, and walked to the door without a word. Their confusion was almost palpable. They expected a breakdown, a storm. Instead, I gave them silence. And silence. I knew, could be the most dangerous answer of all. The click of the boardroom door closing behind me still echoed in my chest as I stepped into the corridor. For a moment, the fluorescent lights above felt harsher than ever, pressing down on me as if to remind me of every hour I had sacrificed here. 11 years of my life, all poured into Stratagem Dynamics, and this was the reward. An envelope, a smirk, and the hollow declaration that I owned nothing. My phone buzzed in my hand. The caller ID made my throat tighten. Mom. I hesitated, but answered anyway. Her voice, tremulous yet firm, spilled through the line. Zara, you gave them your youth, your late nights, your health. You missed holidays, anniversaries, even your father's last birthday. And for what? For them to do this to you? I leaned against the cold wall, my eyes shutting against the memory of empty chairs at family dinners, my desk lamp burning past midnight, the birthdays celebrated with nothing more than emails and cold coffee. Mom's words weren't accusations. They were grief laced with love, but the truth in them hurt more than anything Grant Knox had thrown at me. I wanted to tell her it had been worth it, that protecting the company had somehow protected us, too. But as I stood there, the words wouldn't come. All I could whisper was, I know. Another buzz cut through the silence. This time a message. Anya Patel, my closest confidant at Stratagem, the one who used to sneak in coffee when I worked through weekends. The woman whose promotion I had fought for against Grant's dismissive glare. Her text was short, almost clinical. I'm sorry, Zara. I can't speak up. I need this job, my mortgage, my kids. I can't risk it. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Bitterness settled in my chest, heavier than the envelope I still carried. Betrayal doesn't always come with knives in the back. Sometimes it comes with silence, with the absence of a voice you expected to hear when yours was stolen. And yet, even in the hollow ache of that moment, a truth surfaced, one that brought both irony and grim satisfaction. Stratagem still stood, not because of Grant's reckless bravado or the cowardice of those too afraid to speak, but because of me. The compliance framework I had designed, my system, my architecture, was still woven into every billion-dollar deal, every client assurance, every legal safeguard keeping Stratagem from crumbling. They could strip my title, erase my name from office doors, and pretend I had never existed. But the invisible spine of the company remained mine. Every clause, every safeguard, every hidden contingency bore my fingerprints, and that meant one thing, despite what Grant Knox declared. The company still breathed through the very work they tried to cast aside. I straightened, pocketed my phone, and took a slow breath. The bitterness didn't fade, but it sharpened into something else, a quiet reminder that endings aren't always collapses. Sometimes, they are openings no one else can see. 2 nights later. I sat in my apartment, the television flickering against the dim walls. I hadn't planned on watching, but curiosity has a way of pulling you back toward the very wounds you're trying to forget. There he was, Grant Knox, in his custom Navy suit, seated comfortably before a panel of reporters. His smile was easy, practiced, almost smug. "We are on the brink of history," he declared, voice smooth like a salesman closing a deal. Stratagem Dynamics is prepared to deliver on the most ambitious $1.9 billion contract of the decade. And let me be clear, what slowed us down in the past is no longer an obstacle. Some people were nothing but dead weight, a brake pedal on progress. He leaned forward, eyes glittering with theatrical disdain. That so-called caution? That was just a stone in the road, and stones don't run companies. I didn't need to guess who he meant. My stomach tightened, but my hands stayed folded on my lap. There it was, my career, my loyalty, reduced to a punchline on live television. The camera panned briefly to the board seated behind him. I noticed the fracture lines even through the screen. A few of the older directors shifted uncomfortably, their eyes betraying unease. They had been in those closed-door meetings with me, had seen the warnings I flagged in red ink. They knew I wasn't deadweight. I was the one holding back disaster. But none of them spoke, not one. The newer investors, however, applauded Grant's bravado. They didn't want caution. They wanted speed, risk, spectacle. They believed in his gamble because they were dazzled by the shine of his confidence and in their hunger for returns. They chose to ignore the cracks beneath the surface. I felt the anger coil inside me, hot and slow, not the kind that bursts, but the kind that simmers until it consumes everything. He could rewrite the narrative in front of cameras, but he couldn't erase the truth. Then came the moment that nearly made me laugh out loud. Grant lifted a sheaf of papers with a flourish, as if revealing a sacred text. "We have what I call a contingency ownership framework," he announced, savoring the syllables like a magician revealing his trick. My jaw clenched. That phrase was mine. I had coined it years ago, in the very documents he'd signed without bothering to read. To him, it was just jargon, a shiny phrase to impress investors. But to me, it was the backbone of every safeguard I had built, the framework that gave me more leverage than he could ever imagine. He wielded my words like a weapon, blind to the fact that they were double-edged, and as the applause echoed through the screen, I realized something vital. He had just handed me the rope with which his empire could be undone. The anger inside me didn't fade, it sharpened. The sound of Grant Knox boasting on television still echoed in my head long after the broadcast ended. His grin, his careless use of words he didn't even understand. It all lingered like smoke in a room you can't quite clear. But beneath the sting of humiliation, something else began to stir. A memory, faint at first, but sharp enough to cut through the haze. I pulled out an old leather briefcase from the back of my closet, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were neatly organized binders, color-coded tabs, and files stamped with the heavy ink of legal departments that once mocked me for being too cautious. My fingers brushed over a particular folder marked 2018, European Consortium Draft. That year had been a battlefield of its own. Grant had been desperate to close a string of international defense contracts, pushing deals faster than the lawyers could review them. He'd waved his hand impatiently when I tried to explain the need for safeguards. "Do whatever you want." "Zara," he'd said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Just keep the clients happy and off my back." So I did. And in doing so, I created something he never cared to understand. Vantage Point LLC, an anonymous holding entity designed to protect Stratagem from liability during the earliest phases of billion-dollar contracts. On paper, it looked like just another shell company. In reality, I had registered myself as the sole authorized signatory. It wasn't ego, it was necessity. If anything went wrong, the company needed a single responsible figure to hold the line. I remembered the laughter from the in-house legal team when I presented the framework. "Overkill," one had chuckled. "Zara, you act like we're preparing for war." Their mockery had stung, but I didn't care. I knew from experience that the biggest collapses come from the smallest oversights. Now, as I flipped through those pages, my eyes locked on the line that mattered most. Authorized signatory, Zara Dean. The ink was mine, the authority mine, and nothing Grant or anyone else had signed since could erase it. My heart pounded, but not with anger this time, with something steadier. Hope. Quiet. Restrained. But real. The very framework they dismissed as paranoia had become my shield. Grant could parade his ignorance in front of cameras all he wanted. But the truth lay here. In black and white. The $1.9 billion contract with the European Consortium wasn't Stratagem's. It belonged to Vantage Point LLC, and Vantage Point was mine. I leaned back, staring at the neat signature I had scrawled 7 years earlier. They had mocked me for being too cautious, but in their laughter, I had found my leverage. The silence of my apartment no longer felt empty. It felt like a harbor, holding something they could never see coming. For the first time since that humiliating boardroom, I allowed myself the smallest smile. What do you think happens when someone who's been underestimated for years finally holds all the cards? Do you believe Zara will reveal her hand quietly? Or will Grant Knox strike first in desperation? Stay with me until the end. What's coming next might surprise you more than anything so far. Morning light filtered through the blinds of my apartment, falling across the open binder that had become my anchor. The signature, my signature, stared back at me like a quiet reminder of what I still held. For days, I had carried humiliation like a stone in my chest. But now I felt something steadier. Resolve. Not fiery or reckless, just clear. Deliberate. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. The line rang twice before a deep, measured voice answered. "This is Dr. Helmut Kranz." "Dr. Kranz," I said, forcing my tone to stay even. "This is Zara Dean. We met during the 2018 negotiations. I was Director of Risk Underwriting at Stratagem Dynamics." A pause, then a subtle shift in his tone. "Ah, yes, the cautious one. What can I do for you, Ms. Dean?" I explained carefully, page by page, what I had uncovered, Vantage Point LLC, my role as sole signatory, and the fact that the $1.9 billion contract he believed to be finalized under Stratagem was, in fact, incomplete without me. There was silence on the other end, long enough that I wondered if I had overplayed my hand. Then he spoke, slow and deliberate. "If what you are saying is accurate, Stratagem has no authority to move this contract forward. Without your signature, It is invalid. My breath came easier. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was confirmation. The framework I had built years ago, mocked as paranoia, was now the fulcrum. But even as hope steadied me, another truth pressed in. Stratagem wouldn't go quietly. I had heard whispers through former colleagues. Gideon Hale, the company's sharp-tongued general counsel, was drafting a replacement agreement, a counterfeit, designed to push me out of the picture before anyone outside noticed the gap. Gideon was smart, ruthless, and fully loyal to Grant Knox. If he succeeded, I would lose everything before I had a chance to be heard. "Dr. Kranz," I said carefully, "I need you to see the original documents yourself. Stratagem will try to convince you otherwise." "I expected as much," he replied. Then his voice softened, not with sympathy, but with a kind of respect. "We are holding a press conference to announce the contract next week. Why don't you attend? Not as Stratagem's employee, you no longer are, but as an independent observer, a guest." The word settled on me like a challenge. Guest. Not a seat at the table, not yet, but an invitation into the room where the facade would crack. "Thank you, Dr. Kranz," I said. My voice was steady, though inside my pulse quickened. After the call ended, I sat quietly, the city humming outside my window. The bitterness was still there, but it no longer ruled me. Every move now had to be measured, deliberate, and in that silence, I knew, the next time I stepped into their world, it wouldn't be as the woman they cast aside. The conference hall gleamed under the blaze of stage lights. Rows of cameras lined up like soldiers, their lenses fixed on the podium. The air itself felt rehearsed, thick with anticipation. I sat quietly in the back row, an anonymous face among reporters, investors, and curious onlookers. No one paid me any attention, and that anonymity was its own strange comfort. Then the doors opened, and in walked Grant Knox. His navy suit was impeccable, his smile broad and confident. The applause swelled, orchestrated yet convincing. He raised a hand, savoring the moment, as though this were not a press conference, but a coronation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming through the hall. "Today marks a historic achievement. Stratagem Dynamics has successfully secured the $1.9 billion contract with the European consortium. This deal will propel us into a new era of growth, innovation, and global leadership." Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and for a moment the illusion seemed complete. Grant basked in it, nodding to the board members seated behind him. Some smiled, though their eyes betrayed nerves. They had seen the fine print. They knew the risks. One shareholder, a silver-haired man with glasses, stood from his chair. "Mr. Knox," he said carefully, "there have been whispers about missing authorizations in the paperwork, specifically, a required signature. Can you address that?" The room shifted. The hum of side conversations grew. Grant chuckled. Dismissive. "Minor technicalities. Bureaucratic dust. Nothing more. Rest assured, Stratagem controls every inch of this contract." His tone carried finality, daring anyone to challenge him. But unease lingered. The shareholder sat slowly, his lips pressed tight. The room was not as easily soothed as Grant hoped. That was when Dr. Helmut Kranz rose from his seat at the consortium's table. Calm, deliberate. He adjusted his glasses before speaking into the microphone. "I regret to inform you," he said, his voice steady, "that what Mr. Knox has stated is not entirely accurate. Without the authorization of Vantage Point LLC, this contract is not valid." The words struck like thunder. A silence fell so heavy it pressed against the walls. Grant's smile faltered. Just slightly, but enough for those watching closely to see. Cameras swung toward Kranz, reporters leaning forward like predators scenting blood. "What nonsense is this?" Grant barked, though his laugh sounded brittle. Vantage point is a technical placeholder, nothing more. Krantz shook his head. Firm. It is not a placeholder. It is the legal holding entity, and only its authorized signatory can finalize the agreement. Until that happens, Stratagem has no enforceable contract. The air tightened. My heart pounded. But my face remained still. Sitting in the shadows, I watched the empire begin to crack, each word from Krantz carving deeper into the illusion Grant had built. The tension in the hall was no longer anticipation. It was the sharp edge of revelation. And though no one looked my way yet, I knew the silence would not last. The silence after Dr. Kranz's announcement was thick enough to choke on. For a heartbeat, the entire hall seemed suspended, cameras frozen, pens stilled, the weight of disbelief pressing down on every face. And then, like a stage actor hitting his cue, Grant Knox leaned forward, lips curving back into a smile that looked almost triumphant. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, "this is exactly why you shouldn't believe everything you hear." At his signal, Gideon Hale, Stratagem's general counsel, rose from his seat. He carried a thick folder tucked under his arm, the kind stamped with seals that radiated authority before a single page was read. Gideon's eyes scanned the crowd with practiced confidence before he placed the folder on the podium, flipping it open for the cameras to catch the embossed markings. "This," Gideon declared, "is the supplemental agreement finalized just last month, properly stamped, properly filed. It supersedes any placeholder arrangements made years ago, and it makes Stratagem the sole owner of the $1.9 billion contract." Grant spread his arms wide, soaking in the wave of relief from his side of the boardroom. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and the flash of cameras reignited with frenzied intensity. To anyone watching, it looked as though the crisis had been neatly contained. I felt my chest tighten. For the first time since stepping into this shadowed corner of the hall, a flicker of doubt pierced me. My documents, my signature, could they really be brushed aside so easily by a stamped folder waved in front of the cameras? The thought clawed at me. Maybe this was how it ended, not with justice, but with showmanship and a seal. A reporter near the front called out, "Isn't this just a former employee trying to stir trouble?" Another followed, "Ms. Dean, do you even have standing here? Or are you just bitter about being fired?" Their words struck harder than I expected. Bitter, invisible, reduced to a footnote in a company's press release. For a moment, the humiliation from that boardroom came rushing back, heavier now with the sting of public doubt. Grant's smile widened as he saw me falter. He thought it was over, but despair, even when it grips tight, can also sharpen resolve. I straightened, clutching the binder in my lap. "That agreement," I said clearly, my voice cutting across the noise, "is nothing more than an internal draft, a piece of paper with a stamp, not a binding contract." The reporter stilled, pens frozen again. I walked toward the front, each step deliberate, and laid my folder on the table for all to see. "This," I continued, flipping open the document with the official seal of the Department of Defense, "is the only record that matters. Vantage Point LLC, sole authorized signatory, Zara Dean. Without this, Stratagem has nothing." The cameras surged toward me now, the room pivoting in an instant. Gideon's smirk faltered, and Grant's victory smile froze into something closer to dread. The weight of the document in my hands was heavier than any briefcase I had ever carried into Stratagem's offices. I laid it flat on the table, where cameras could see the seal glint under the lights, the unmistakable mark of the Department of Defense. My voice didn't waver as I spoke. "This," I said, "is the binding agreement, the only one that exists. The $1.9 billion contract is not controlled by Stratagem Dynamics. It belongs to Vantage Point LLC, and I am its sole signatory." The silence that followed was not disbelief. It was shock, the kind that roared louder than applause, louder than protest. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised but motionless, as if afraid that moving might shatter the moment. Dr. Helmut Krantz stepped up beside me, adjusting his glasses. "I have reviewed these documents personally," he said, "and she is correct. Without Ms. Dean's authorization, this contract is null. Stratagem has no legal claim." The words echoed through the hall like a verdict. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Investors murmured in alarm. Board members exchanged frantic glances. And somewhere near the back, a shareholder dropped his pen with an audible clatter. Grant Knox surged to his feet, his face a shade of crimson I had rarely seen. "This is betrayal!" he thundered, his voice cracking with fury. "You think you can walk back into this company and steal what I built? You were a glorified paper pusher. Zara, nothing more." His rage should have frightened me, but it only underscored the truth. He wasn't in control anymore. One of the older directors, a woman who had served on the board for nearly 2 decades, leaned forward. "Mr. Knox," she said carefully, "these papers bear your initials. This framework, Vantage Point, was approved by you in 2018. Another director fumbled through his folder, pulling out a scanned memo. "Yes," he added, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You signed this into policy. I remember the meeting. You dismissed it as a formality." Grant froze, the fury draining into something worse. Recognition. He had approved the very safeguard that now disarmed him. His signature, scrawled carelessly years ago, stared back at him like a ghost come to collect a debt. The cameras caught it all. The trembling hands, the sweat beading at his temple, the board turning against him with every page revealed. Reporters whispered frantically, their headlines already writing themselves, "CEO undone by his own signature." I stood motionless, not triumphant, not gloating, simply present. For years, I had been invisible, the quiet voice no one wanted to hear. Now the truth I had carried in silence rang louder than any speech Grant had ever given. The hall buzzed with disbelief, but beneath it all, a new current surged. The reversal was no longer just possible, it was happening, here and now, in plain sight. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, headlines blared across every financial outlet, Stratagem's $1.9 billion deal in jeopardy. Stock tickers glowed red as the company's value plummeted. Millions erased in minutes. Investors who once hailed Grant Knox as a visionary now scrambled to distance themselves, their phone calls short and icy. I watched the chaos unfold on television, the camera capturing Grant storming out of headquarters as shareholders demanded answers. His once loyal allies peeled away one by one, their silence now as damning as their applause once was. The empire he had built on charm and bravado was crumbling in real time, every brick loosened by the truth he had ignored. In the midst of the collapse, a message arrived on my phone. "Zara, we need to talk, please." It was from Gideon Hale. Hours later, he found me in a quiet cafe, stripped of his courtroom swagger. His voice cracked as he leaned across the table. "We can fix this. If you let Stratagem retain partial rights, I'll make sure you get 50% of the profits." 50, that's more than fair. I held his gaze, the bitterness of years of dismissal still sharp in my chest. "You think I want scraps?" I asked softly. "You think this was ever about money?" He flinched at the calm in my tone, because calm was something he couldn't bargain against. I stood, leaving him with nothing but the sound of his own desperation. That afternoon, Dr. Helmut Krantz called. His voice carried the same measured steadiness it had during negotiations years ago. "Ms. Dean, the consortium has no desire to waste time. Stratagem is compromised, but if you are willing, we would welcome Vantage Point LLC as the lead contractor in their place." For a moment, I let the words sink in. All the humiliation, the silence, the betrayal, it had led here. Stratagem's loss was now my gain. not by revenge shouted in anger, but by patience, by truth, by the framework I had built when no one was watching. And just like that, the company that once told me I owned nothing was about to watch me sign everything in my own name. The signing ceremony was nothing like the boardrooms I had once endured. No heavy oak tables, no forced applause, no smug smirks from men who thought they owned the air I breathed. Instead, it was quiet, deliberate, and honest. Dr. Helmut Krantz slid the final document across the table toward me, the pages crisp and unblemished, untouched by Stratagem's hands. "Ms. Dean," he said, his tone calm but resolute. "With your signature, Vantage Point LLC becomes the lead contractor. The consortium is ready to proceed, under your authority." My pen hovered for just a moment, not out of hesitation, but out of recognition. 11 years of sacrifice, humiliation, and silence had carried me to this line. I pressed ink to paper, each stroke of my name carving away the weight of everything they once said I didn't own. By the next morning, headlines flooded the news cycle. Stratagem loses $1.9 billion deal. CEO Grant Knox under investigation. The empire he built on arrogance and recklessness was unraveling under scrutiny. His name now bound to failure. I sat by my window, phone buzzing endlessly with notifications. Reporters wanted statements, investors wanted introductions, and old colleagues wanted to reconnect. I ignored most of them. One message, however, made me pause. It was from my mother. "You finally claimed what you deserve. Your father would be proud." Tears pricked at my eyes as I read those words. I thought of the birthdays missed, the empty chairs at family dinners, the moments I had traded away in the name of duty. For years. I wondered if it had all been for nothing. Now, at last, the scales felt balanced. Later that afternoon, I walked into the consortium's headquarters. The polished brass plaque gleamed in the light of the atrium. Vantage Point LLC, lead contractor. I stopped, my reflection flickering across the letters, for the first time in over a decade. I smiled without restraint. They thought I owned nothing, I whispered to myself, but my silence was my greatest asset. My name, once dismissed, now stood where the world could see it. Never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes it's the quiet work, the overlooked effort, that changes everything when the moment arrives. Tell me in the comments, if you were in Zara's place, would you have stayed silent or fought back sooner? Tap like. Share this story with someone who needs encouragement. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice.